Well, it's great to be together for part two of leadership and engagement. It's a matter of trust. Last week, we took a look at trust from a leadership standpoint. This week, we're going to focus on the experience of a team and trust, where the leader certainly plays a role, but each member of the team does as well. Well, as we did last week, I'll start with a brief round of introductions. Then we'll take a look at this story, this trust story, and and then have a discussion about it, a trust conversation. And you'll see that this truly is a conversation, a discussion about various aspects that are facets, well, both in terms of theory as well as strategies and skills, leadership strategies and skills. But welcome, I'm glad you're here. Let me begin with introducing you to Yvette Bethel, who is an author. She's a trust expert. She's a CEO and award-winning author, as well as a 6 Seconds preferred partner. So she knows emotional intelligence like I wish I did. I'm always learning from her. But Yvette, it's great to have you here today. How are you?
Well, it's great to be back, Rick. As you know, I love talking about trust, and these trust conversations are quite juicy.
Yeah.
So I'm all in. Thanks for inviting me.
It's so good to hear it, and it's so true. These stories give us a lot to think about and an opportunity for learning as well.
Mm.
Lorraine Fellows is with us as well. She's a speaker, trust facilitator, an emotional intelligence expert as well as an experienced educational consultant, neurodiversity. That's something that anytime you talk about the neurodiversity, Lorraine, my ears tune into you. I'm always eager to also learn more from you. But welcome, glad you're here. How are you today?
Yes, thank you. I'm really glad to be here. I'm very happy. It's a beautiful sunny day here in England, and really looking forward to this conversation from a team's perspective.
Very good. Let me start with offering this quote by Dale Carnegie. Inaction breeds doubt and fear. Action breeds confidence and courage. And I think as you'll listen to the story and then our conversation about it, you'll see the power that comes from action, the pain that comes from inaction as well. But it's that action and all the goodness that takes place from it and through it. It has a huge impact on a team, both the individuals and the group as a team, as well as their foundation of trust. Let me first offer three particular numbers. And let me do this in the context of also introducing myself. Hello again, I'm Rick Cram. Plan to be your best as you navigate pain. And the pain point we're going to be taking a look at today is best described as change exhaustion or change fatigue. Perhaps you can relate, perhaps at some point in your past you've seen it, or maybe you're there right now. We'll define what that looks like. And the idea of this being relevant today is found in these three numbers I'd like to share with you. They are 20%, 73%, and 54%. The 20%, it represents the number of employees who feel disconnected or actually feel connected to their culture. That means 8 out of 10, and perhaps you can relate to this, feel disconnected from the organizational culture. That's a lot. And that means it needs to be addressed. The 73% represents this, the number who say stress impacts their mental health negatively. And imagine what happens when our mental health is impacted negatively. It affects how we communicate. It affects the decisions. It affects our energy level. It affects how we relate to others. And we'll see how that actually plays out in this trust story that we'll share with you. The last number is 54%. 54% is the number of people, more than half, who are experiencing now change fatigue, the rapid sequence of ongoing change after change after change. So why don't we get into it? Is there anything that you'd like to add, Yvette or Lorraine, before we get started and I share this story?
No, I'm good. Um,
Yep, wait, that's fine.
Very good. Very good. This is a story shared with me by Ronmir, who is from New Delhi, India, originally. He's now here in the Boston area and works at a bank branch in Waltham, Massachusetts. And the name of this story, we're calling it The Trust Factor. And he shared with me how when he showed up for his first day of work about a year and a half ago, he had a meeting with Sarah, his boss, to sit down and talk about how this first day of work is going to go. She went on to explain how you're joining us at a time when we're making a number of changes. And Ron Meir immediately related how his first thought was, oh, great. I left the other bank to get away from that endless stream of changes where everyone was exhausted, including me, he said. So as Sarah continued, she said that we're all aware of the toll the past few years have taken between the new technologies to learn, product launches, 2 mergers, not to mention COVID, all of which sounded terribly familiar to Ronmir. The change fatigue that he lived with and worked with was evident. He said that he could see it in the level of disengagement, the amount of increased conflict between team members, the negativity and the low productivity. And obviously he's realizing it's the same here. Then she added something that he had not heard before. The bank's leadership understands this issue, these challenges going on, and has empowered us to turn this around. The executives at Ronmir's previous job were in effect missing in action. He hadn't heard anything like that before. The trust that he and his colleagues had in this previous bank flew out the window along with their energy, he said. But here in his new job, it's different. Thinking about the past year or so, what Sarah did is something that he'll never forget, he said. She guided us through how to lead ourselves and others through these challenging times. She created opportunities for us to voice our concerns and stressors, he said. He thought that was immediately critical, that she was open to hearing what her team had to say. She and the company's leadership actually listened and replied in meaningful ways. And they followed through.
Excuse me, Rick, sorry to interrupt. I've just got a message that somebody's in the waiting room wanting to join.
Thank you so
sorry,
much.
I'm listening carefully, but
So
I just
glad
thought.
you did. Yes. It's Yvette Jordan, right?
Yes.
Very good. Thank you.
She couldn't find the joining information, so I've just sent it.
Very good.
Thank you.
And let me just say, Yvette, welcome. Glad you're here. Join on both the camera and mic as you wish.
Thank you.
Hi, Yvette.
Hello.
Hope you're doing great today.
Yeah, thanks.
So we were just starting to share this trust story. Let me just recap the first half of the story this way, that Ron Meir, who works at a bank branch in the Boston area, had worked at a previous bank where everyone was exhausted of the change after change after change, the mergers, new technologies, and so forth. And they were experiencing change fatigue, suffering all of it. And no one was doing anything about it, especially the leadership. But now at his new job, where he thought he would find a fresh place, the very same challenges were in place. There's change fatigue, but there was one new difference. The leadership, including his boss, Sarah, were keen about it, were aware of it, and about to take action to turn it around. And here's the second half of the story. So Sarah had us meet as a team, Ronmir explained, and made those planning sessions. And that was key to him, and that was meaningful to him. And that was a smart move on Sarah's part. She made them planning sessions, and in such a way that they made plans for the branch, for themselves individually, as well as for the team. They developed goals together, goals that they cared about. And Sarah and the upper management empowered them to decide on how they'd achieve them. We were finally, for the first time, he said, working as a team. Then Sarah led them through a periodic set of exercises for professional and personal development. We got to know each other, them as well as themselves better and on a deeper level, so you can see how the team is growing together. This and more brought them to a point as a team, as well as with Sarah, where they were really starting to trust each other and refreshingly starting to even put trust in the leadership as well. He explained that we are the ones who created the changes we wanted most to see. And we could feel it. Interestingly, and this is one of the things that fascinated me. And it's an example of how powerful it is when you've got a team that is truly cohesive and trusting. Customers were feeling it as well. He shared with me that towards the end of the story that a customer had just finished with a meeting with him. He's an investment advisor there at the bank branch. As she headed towards the door, he said, she turned around and said loud enough so that everyone in the branch lobby could hear, "You know, I love it here," the customer said. "All of you are the best. Thank you for all you do." So he ends up summarizing it by saying, we went from being perpetually exhausted to finding ways, with the help of Sarah and the leadership, to create new positive energy for ourselves and for each other. It's palpable, he concluded. So that concludes the story. And why don't we begin with sharing some reflections? Yvette or Lorraine, who would like to go first? Interested in your thoughts.
I can go if you like.
Sure.
So let's take a look at the case. In the beginning, Ronmir started working for a bank, and on his first day, he realized his new employer was undergoing multiple changes. This was a concern, obviously, because it seems that one of the reasons he left his previous employer was that he was experiencing what he called an endless stream of changes. So I kind of looked at it from the perspective of the spiral of trust to understand where is he on this trust spectrum that moves from, complete openness and vulnerability to complete or intense distrust. And to me, he probably experienced some distrust, but there's a point in the middle of the spectrum where there's some distrust and maybe some trust. And that's because, they kind of stepped up and said, well, we empower you to do this. So I'm thinking that there may have been a combination of both for him. From his perspective, Ronmir, in looking at how he approaches trust, it seems that based on the pillar of trust theory, you have 3 styles: the integrity style, the emotional mastery style, and the redisposition style. Now, when people are in stressful situations, they tend to rely more on the emotional mastery style because they're feeling some kinds of emotions. And so that tends to be more dominant, especially if you have constant change going on and your foundation is constantly being kind of pulled away from you. And you have to figure out what it should look like going forward. So from the perspective of how he approaches trust, he is most likely using the emotional mastery style just to navigate every day. And the thing with these styles is we all use all of the styles. I think I said this last time. No style, this doesn't define your identity or personality. Ideally, we should be able to tap into the style that's needed in each situation. So it should be an adaptive approach to using the styles. So despite the fact that Ronmir noticed that he may be in for another rough ride, because of the similarities between the current and the previous employers, it appears that despite all of that, he remained trust willing. And perhaps he had to make it work because he just left one job and just started another one. So he didn't feel that he had the opportunity to kind of jump ship at this point. But perhaps he remained open because at his previous place of employment, the executives were missing in action. And at the current place of employment, they were empowering the branches, the bank branches to do what they need to do to turn the situation around. So, and on top of that, I think his trust willingness was strengthened because they also supported the team with helping them to develop skills that they can use to lead themselves through the changes, which I'll let Lorraine talk about it. That has a lot to do with developing their self-trust. So building the trust when it comes to building healthy work relationships, Ronmir's new employer delegated authority to the branches. So they had the freedom to build trust within their team. So they decentralized. When you centralize things, it also takes away trust. By decentralizing the solution, this respects the culture of the branches and demonstrates trust in the management team to make meaningful changes. So that's why the decentralization helped in this situation. Every situation is different. Now, Sarah's leadership is another key component of the trust building process. She exhibited a strong integrity style. She actually exhibited 3 styles. From an integrity point of view, she was following through on the deliverables and making sure that what the company promised, she was delivering. So from that perspective, there was an alignment. She also demonstrated advanced emotional intelligence because she did a lot more listening. In fact, it was highlighted that it seemed like she only did a lot of listening. But I'm sure she was not only listening, but it seems like she was in balance. And what this means is she was tapping into the climate of the team and staying on top of that. So because when you have change, I think various change models show where the organization is traveling along a line and then the change is announced and then there's chaos. It dips down and then it comes back up. But then if the change worked, the organization is now kind of plateauing at another level, a higher level. That's if the change worked. So she was using her listening during that dip so that she can, kind of tap into what's going on in that chaotic phase where people are not sure, they need some training, they may not know what to do that's new, all those things that happen during that period. If she's listening, she can respond. So I think the way she used her emotional mastery was applicable to the situation. The situation needed that in particular. So she was really on top of, her emotional intelligence with that. Now, from a we disposition standpoint, we disposition is really about, those competencies are about bringing people together and helping them to feel that they're united and part of something bigger than themselves. And in doing that, you can create safe space that allows the trust to grow together, not just, kind of one person. So when building the trust, what she did was she built the full pillar instead of just one, because the other reason that that's needed is because you have different people with different trust styles that coexist within teams. And so you need each style as a leader. You need to be able to exhibit them all so that you can cover all your bases when you're collectively. Individually, you can adapt, but also collectively, you need to cover them all. So The team seemed to successfully integrate trust into the culture. And this is notable, especially in banking. I've come from working 40 years in banks, and controls are the norm. And the controls communicate distrust. Like, you do it the way I want you to do it, and then I'm going to check you not once, but not twice, maybe sometimes 3 times. There are 3 checks. So this is the norm in those cultures. And because the structures are based on distrust, this can be counterproductive to trust building interpersonally. So despite all of this, Sarah, Ronmir, and the team were able to build trust. And the evidence of this is what Rick said at the end, where a customer came in and said, I love it here. All of you are the best. Thank you for all that you do. And this seemed to have flowed naturally. This isn't something where, because, in some organizations, someone will call and say, well, if you like what I did, just, let them know for me. This seemed to be something that came from this person's heart. And it's a natural, powerful outcome of the work they did with building trust.
Wonderful, Yvette. Thank you so much for that. I've got several questions for you, but I'm going to hold them
You
until
can ask, because I tend to forget what I said.
Yeah.
No worries. We're recording it all. We captured it.
But yeah, if you have a question, you can ask.
So the idea, you touched on it, since he's new, Ronmir's new at this bank, he's got to show up.
Right.
And he's play along. He'll go with the flow, so to speak. He hasn't been there enough to push back in any particular way. Not that it would be wise anyway, but so what you honed in on that, I thought that was fascinating, that when we're new in an organization, where, as we learned from you last week, how when we come from a certain culture, we bring some of that with us.
Right.
And now he's stepping into an entirely new, and I heard in his voice this refreshment of where they eventually got. But I know, having walked a bank through the plan to be your best as you navigate change, and they're all suffering from change exhaustion. It can be a bumpy road.
Mm-hmm. And for him to be trust willing is quite interesting, because in our latest tool assessment, the competency plan, development plan, we show trust willingness, but we also show the trust risk disposition. So what that says is, even though we may be willing, we're still unwilling at some level.
Yes.
The two, for some people, not everybody, but the two are at play. And the question is, which one will you allow to play out? And I think he was probably more willing because some things were different. And then slowly, as Sarah, the manager, kind of showed that she was, committed to doing things differently, his trust willingness probably expanded, where the risk aversion, this is the paradox, the risk aversion lessened over time. So it was a dynamic that Sarah carefully kind of curated or helped him to move through.
Fascinating. As once Lorraine shares some thoughts, I'll talk for a moment, share the one story that reveals, with change exhaustion comes with it passivity, resistance to change.
Mm-hmm.
And the stress shows. There's one particular moment that really stood out.
But what's interesting about the case is that these people experience change exhaustion. Trust, transforming trust is another change kind of initiative.
Yes.
Because they had meetings, and they came up with plans, they executed those plans in order for this to work. But the difference between this initiative and others is that this one reduces the stress of the other ones.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Exactly. Thank you, Yvette. Thank you. Lorraine, I'm looking forward to what you're going to share.
Yes, thank you. I think it's a really powerful example of someone who worked through, just because something was one way in the past doesn't mean that it has to be the same way
Right.
in his new job. It was C.S. Lewis who said, you can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending. And what he did was really dug into his self-trust in this situation, because he wasn't powerless. He didn't accept the fact that he was powerless in this situation and it was going to be a repeat of what had happened before. Of course, he needed support of the leadership, Sarah, etc. But I think there was a real increase in his awareness of what was happening inside, and a challenge to his internal narratives. He wasn't telling himself the same thing's going to happen. It's going to be a repeat. I'm going to get more exhausted. I'm not going to receive the support, because often we have to examine, it's really important to examine the narratives, and he examined his narrative. And I think that helped create that openness, you know, that trust willingness Yvette was talking about, that he wasn't limited. He wasn't limiting the situation in front of him, because there's a real important journey that we go on with trusting ourselves, of connecting to ourselves and the narrative that we're telling ourselves, and finding the space for choice within that. And also how I really believe it aligned with his core values and long-term goals, that he was obviously wanting to serve people. You know, he had a mission, a passion, if you like, to do the best job he could. It mattered to him how he came across and served people in his work. And that narrative, then, he was telling himself about the opportunities here. There are opportunities. It is a new situation. There's new leadership. And with the team, when they were doing that personal and professional development, I think that was really key to increasing that intrinsic self-awareness, finding the things that aligned with what really mattered, you know, his core values, long-term goals, and tapping into what we call the 3 I's, a model for self-trust, which is our instinct, inner voice, and insight and intuition. Intuition. And that is how he can gather really important information about what's happening. Maintaining that degree of openness and trust willingness with that personal professional development, they began to trust each other as he absolutely began to trust himself more in this new situation. And that using those 3 I's enables us to make those considered decisions, find that space for choice, and find the ways to keep open, to keep being trust willing, to keep trusting ourselves. He was trusting himself, and more trust was built within the team. And there's a real increase in inclusivity then. He feels a part of the team. He feels more valued and more able to do the job that he wanted to do in the way he wanted to do it. So this increase of awareness of the opportunities, of the difference, the ways it is different and how to make a difference. And of course, Sarah with her careful offering of those opportunities, you know, the careful building of team cohesion was facilitating that increase in self-trust for each of them. So the collective self-trust, if you like, the team trust really increased, and it became very tangible. And really, he felt that difference. And obviously, importantly, the customers, the people they were serving, you know, felt, you know, the difference. It was not just words they were hearing, there was a real deep emotional experience they were receiving there. That made a real difference.
And that's what you're really shining a light on. I'm sorry, Yvette, go ahead. You'll need to unmute. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, Lorraine made an important connection between self-trust and trusting others, because the configuration or the framework that we create around trusting ourselves impacts or it projects onto others and impacts them. So it's good to you really work on how you trust yourself, so that you know, you're able to create breakthroughs. They were able to create breakthroughs in their situation, which Lorraine pointed out. But that's because they not only worked on the interpersonal trust, but there's also intrapersonal trust that they focused on.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Yvette. It was a planning exercise that had continuity to it, it seems to me. It must have. And it was also a set of emotional experiences. And I think that plays a huge role, not in just the forming of trust and getting to a point where the team is more cohesive, but that it's an emotional experience in the context of planning. I'll elaborate on that. I can't help but think Sarah, as a leader, took this quote by Max Dupree to heart. The first responsibility of a leader is to define reality. The last is to say thank you. And in between, the leader is a servant. Isn't that the first responsibility of a leader is to define reality? That's what she and her leadership did. They defined reality. We are dealing with change fatigue and all that comes with it. And I've seen this with a number of my clients, a bank, healthcare, others, even Burger King, for example, where there's a general sense that these are some of the symptoms of change, exhaustion, change fatigue, a general sense of apathy. I don't care. There's resistance or passive resignation toward organizational changes, and it's fair to say towards any change. Then the next they got to this point because there are so many changes one after the other, and it became just overwhelming. No, not one more change. But Sarah, in her wisdom, and along with the leadership, acknowledged the reality. That's the very first step that's required to even enter into a process of planning.
I think with the defining the reality, it was also her responsibility to believe that it was doable and to hold that vision as they move through it, because there'll always be some things that happen. I mean, change with trust is nonlinear. You go 2 steps forward, 2 back, 1 forward, 2 back, 3 forward, and so on. So it's just a zigzag when it comes to trust. And for her to be able to hold the space for trust, despite all of that happening, because people are people, they're human beings, they make mistakes or they fall into old habits. And for her to hold that is quite powerful that she was able to do that. Not everyone can. They get discouraged, like, oh, so and so is doing that again. I'm sick and tired, and blah blah blah. You know, they go into that kind of frame of mind as opposed to holding a higher vision, despite it.
So come back to Ronmir's story. There's one particular time when I was leading a full day plan to be your best as navigate change for a bank. Halfway through the program, one of the managers, one of the 50 managers there, raised his hand in the middle of one particular exercise. And he said, "Rick, this is all well and good, but I'm too busy to plan." There was a laughter that went around the room, like, "I can't believe you just said that." But and all of a sudden, I'm taking a deep breath. I said, "All right, this is an opportunity. I need to be careful on how I responded." But right there, you see, I'm too busy to plan. Resistance to change, stress, and you got to imagine the frustration that is echoed in that statement. If you take a look at the word too, it means excessive. So rephrase that: I'm excessively busy. And he's resistant to trying something new, to plan. So it's a call to action, actually.
I think for busy people, I think it's not always that they're resistant to trying something new. I think they're resistant to taking on one more thing.
Yeah.
Because I have quite a few clients like that, and they are so overwhelmed with volume that this feels like an addition to that state of being overwhelmed.
Which is something I think it's fair to say most people in work have experienced in recent years. One of the top 3 stressors, I was reading in an article the other day about the level of stress, and there are 3 stressors, one of which is being assigned more responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
That was the number 2, right? Number
Yeah,
2.
I believe that because what happens is organizations are not adept at assigning one more thing and taking away something. So now everything is still a priority plus one more thing, as opposed to negotiating priorities or moving something to someone else to do it. Like there are ways to help people to manage that, but people are so caught up in their own stress drama that they don't think about how they can shift things around to alleviate the collective stress level.
What do you need to shed? It's one of the questions I love to ask in my programs, but it's got to be part of any planning exercise. What do you need to shed?
Mm-hmm.
And you see the eyes go up like, oh, I definitely want to think this one through. Because there's
Yeah.
always,
Now,
always.
some people don't want to shed anything because, it's kind of power thing for them. But even if you renegotiate priorities, that can kind of open the valve a bit, of the stress valve.
One of the things I believe Sarah did right was at some point, she included professional and personal development. And as Ronmir pointed out, that they got to know themselves individually better. He got to know himself better through how that was done, and he got to know the others. And that's one of the reasons why the identity, re-anchoring and identifying each person's identity in the planning process is part of the prepare strategy and plan to be your best. The P in plan stands for prepare.
Yeah.
And then so that's what I honed in on from the 8 leadership and planning strategies in my program. Then from the communication strategies, these are 7 communication strategies and the skills to support them that are all about building trust-based relationships. The last one of the 7 is collaboration. Lorraine, you pointed out how they collaborated. They clearly went through the planning process, creating a shared experience. They experienced it together. And for it to come out as successfully as it apparently did, they've got to be having positive emotional responses to the process of planning, to the collaboration. That's the beauty of collaborating, whether it's in a sales meeting or a planning session. When it's a shared experience with positive emotional responses through it, that helps to reduce the cortisol, reduce the stress levels, and open people up.
I think the collaboration overlaps with the pillar of trust as well, because that's one of the we disposition competencies. And the communication it kind of links people depending on how the communication works. It connects people more or it separates people. It has the power to do either or a combination of both.
Yeah, yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So planning is an exercise in collaboration. It is an exercise in addressing trust. It is an exercise of communication.
Mhm.
Everything from the listening to the sharing to thinking about those things that are meaningful to each individual, those goals that mean a lot to them individually and collectively. They went from dealing with their day-to-day stress in a fragmented way to now coming together and basically, with Sarah's guidance, rebuilding the team.
Mhm.
It was interesting at the one of the last things I asked him was, so where do you see your career going? And he said, I'm doing exactly what I wanted to be doing and I'm thoroughly enjoying it. He had no plans for doing something different in 10 or 15 years. And here he is, only maybe late 20s or about 30 years old. He's right where he wants to be and thoroughly appreciating it.
Mm.
Let me just invite Yvette Jordan, unmute as you wish. What we'll do now is just open this up a little bit more of a conversation. What are your thoughts, Lorraine, as you've been
Mm.
to some of what Yvette and I've said?
Just something you just said about how he feels he's just where he wants to be in this moment in time. I think it is the part of the role of healthy, functioning team, you know, having that unity, you know, that flows between them, that they may not know really the right place, but they know when they're there, you know, and how leadership is key to facilitating being in the right place, you know, with the right skill set and increasing that and providing opportunities. And I think, you know, in the work that Sarah did with them, with the team in that personal professional development, he could say that this is the right place for me now. And that gives a real sense of satisfaction, isn't it? So it's a way of them contributing. Marshall Rosenberg, founder of Nonviolent Communication, said the greatest human need we have is to contribute, you know, to the well-being of others, you know, personally, professionally. And so he was using his skill set, his experience in a way that he was feeling was making the biggest positive difference. And that's a very powerful thing because it empowers people and obviously empowers the whole team
Yes,
as
yeah,
well.
that is powerful. I've often found this, if it's planning is done the right way, the team that plans together grows together.
Mm.
And Sarah did it right. And obviously she had a team of people who had the potential to be successful individually through this as well.
Yes. Yeah, I was also thinking, Yvette mentioned the paradox, you know, that we find in trust as well, where we are become more aware of the risks involved and the rewards. And, you know, the thing about vision, to be able to see, hear, and to hold in balance, not, you know, to have that wisdom to know, be aware of the risks and try and mitigate those with
Right.
that personal professional development, and also see the rewards, you know, for them as individuals, for them as a team, for them as a whole, the whole bank really, and the impact to the customers. And it's just a win-win then. So that trust paradox, I just felt there was a real light being shone on that as well.
It's interesting. You're pointing out how their planning is a factor of looking forward. They aren't focused on the challenges of now or the pain of what the past set of months, quarters, and years have been. They're looking ahead, and that forward looking, it takes them out of what's difficult about right
Yeah.
Rick, I'm curious. I don't know how familiar you are with the rest of the bank, but how did some of the other branch managers manage to change? Was it, because usually it would be varied, the results would be varied. Like some would be very good at it, some kind of okay, and then others not so good. Like, what did you find, if you were exposed to it?
he didn't share with me anything at all going on with the other branches. This is what his particular branch experienced. I can tell you that when the bank that I worked with, there were managers and from various departments as well as some branch managers. And based on some work that I've done for branding and marketing for a different bank, interviewing different branch managers, uh, they they're all rather unique experiences,
Mhm.
for a number of reasons. One, and actually, my conversation with Ronmir started with my talking about how since he's only been in the Boston area for 7 or so years, how different areas around Boston can be. The North Shore has a slightly different culture
That's right.
than does Metro West versus the South Shore, and even going into more specific parts. And he knew that. He actually picked up on that right away. That because he had told a short story of working in one particular branch, then moving to another, and seeing the difference in the clientele as well as the staff.
Mhm.
So those are factors, and I've seen that. I've worked with that also with an energy company that was a client, and what it's a call to do is understand those subtleties and apply them, bump them up against how you're communicating.
Well, why I asked is when I worked for a bank full time, I had responsibility for 8 countries. And every country had its own laws, its own culture, and many other things, ways of doing things, language, everything. And I found that at first we made a big mistake with rolling out what it was that we wanted to roll out because we assumed that we would just harmonize and everyone would do the same thing. And we just got the biggest blowback you can imagine. And we realized that every launch had to be customized. Um, Otherwise, they would ignore it because it's just, someone in the head office imposing, you know, the will of the company on them, and it didn't make sense. So therefore, they ignored it. So I think from the case study perspective, it seems that they took that into account. By decentralization has a big impact on trust for so many reasons. I only listed 2 of them, but I've seen what centralization does, and I've seen what decentralizing does. And in order for trust to be deeply implanted, it needs to be a decentralized solution. That's my experience, especially with the bigger companies. It's way too big to trust, you see, in some cases. The company I came from had 70,000 employees in 130 countries. And so, what are you trusting? You have to
Yeah.
decentralize to build
Yeah.
build the trust in pockets, because there's no way you can build trust for the whole company. That's impossible.
Reminds me of the phrase, all politics are local.
Yes,
Mhm.
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And I suppose I would venture to say that if the bank was to try to do this on a larger scale, as opposed to branch by branch, it would have had a very different
Yeah, yeah.
effect. Each branch would have had their own. Um,
I
yeah,
think that's what the branch and the bank in New Delhi did. I think they probably tried to control it from a centralized location.
Mhm.
I've seen both ways.
last
Yeah.
thing I'm reflecting on is how Sarah used planning. And I like to think about those. There are 7 particular benefits of planning that I get excited about. One is that planning in itself as a process lowers the stress. You're dealing with stress and you've got to do something about it. Planning is an excellent process or tool, if you will, for reducing the cortisol. It brings harmony to the goals and how you're going to achieve them. It also clarifies the use of resources, including people's time and all other resources. That kind of clarity is and can be empowering. It creates a measurement tool because as you go further down the road, now you've got something to measure your progress against. What's working well, what could be going better. It's also defining how each person fits into the plan, individually and as a team. It's and when the plan, which I believe is like a breathing document, it changes, it should change. In fact, I heard someone say the another week, or maybe it was even late last year, go ahead and create a plan you're going to diverge from. Sometimes planning, we always plan in the now based on what we know now, based on our current situation. Even if the plan itself is going to be something that you end up saying, well, I'm going to do this, that's not working, I'm going to try to do something else. That's okay. It's a communications tool that helps clarify um, your future and the future for others. Lastly, and this is what we've seen in this particular story, it creates an energy of its own. There's energy that comes out of it, and that's fuel for motivation.
I think what you're describing is effective planning because I've seen, or it's not automatic that planning drives all those things because I've seen organizations where they can never finish a project or they go in circles. A year later, they're still talking about the same thing. I think what you've described is effective planning, and effective planning goes well together with execution because sometimes you have a good plan and people can't execute. So I would say effective planning and execution will bring about those results because it requires, effective communication on all kinds of other things, trust building, everything.
Um, I've seen efforts to planning that broke trust.
That's right. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's because sometimes planning is like a company, the owner or the executives will make a plan that doesn't consider what other people think or feel. And then they impose the will of the plan on everybody. And they're just like, what are they thinking? And how could they do this to us? And whatever, right? And so there's so many parts to planning that it has to be quite right in order for there to be a flow that's impactful, beneficial, and safe. It's creating safe space because change is always going to be a place of unsafe space for many people. That's why people resist.
Seen it also where the leader of the organization, I had one particular client, they said we need to go through a branding and marketing plan exercise. The top executive who empowered the team to do this with me and my team, we came back to him, presented the results of research and what that research indicates we should do, and he squelched it on the spot. It wasn't what he wanted to hear, especially the research.
Yeah, yeah,
Trust was broken.
deeply.
Yeah. Lorraine, what are your thoughts?
Mhm. Yes, I really like that we were saying about planning, Rick, because what struck me earlier was how intentional and proactive Sarah was. And obviously we've got there's some gaps in the story, if you like. I just wonder, how she learnt to do all that when she had a few tries at things and, learnt by experience, of course, I'm sure. Um, but how some people are more naturally good at that sort of thing. And some people, obviously, it needs to be really intentionally, taught, experienced, modeled. Um, and I think, in my own world of education, I think of, teaching staff who are naturally really good and skilled. They were skillful at creating an environment really conducive for learning, with the young people, and others who it was much more transactional. And the important thing that she realized, it's about relationships. That's how trust is at the heart of this story, this experience for the people, because it's the trust. You know, when our hearts are open, when we're open to building relationship about things that matter, when we care about the things that matter, in our workplace, and trust is built, then we've got relationships working well. There is the communication, there is the moving together. They felt that team cohesion, so that together, because I'm sure there'll be more challenges down the line, for that young man and his job. But when there are those strong relationships and trust at the heart, then that makes all the difference, because you then feel you're standing on solid ground. You've got something you can build on, um, and it increases the compassion, self-compassion, the compassion. It increases the understanding, so people are able to contribute with innovation, and vision moving forward.
That
Really important.
foundation is so significant. It really is. That's as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about, all right, well, like you mentioned, when the challenges arise, because there will be challenges.
Mhm.
They will be tested. But in your view, what are some of the most important parts of that foundation?
I think, we mentioned it earlier that, and as Yvette often says, trust is an inside out job. That it starts with us. It starts with that deep connection with ourselves, that intrinsic awareness, the listening to our three eyes, the connection with that inner voice, our intuition. There's something greater than ourselves that we can align, the things that matter the most to us with. And from that creates that open-heartedness, that creates the vulnerability with wisdom, and awareness of other people, awareness of our impact on other people, awareness not just of our needs, but other people's needs. And that absolutely is contagious. That will encourage, like Yvette has talked about, that has an impact on other people. So it's like our trust willingness increases our trustworthiness. So other people feel safe with us and can trust us more. And then we trust them more. And it's a yes, there'll be challenges, and there'll be times when it's not a linear process again, that we might have to go back and dig deep and assess the risk reward, use our wisdom, and connect with ourselves again to actually move forward. But that cohesion, when we talked about collaboration, communication, when it's working well, there's the whole paradigm of one can achieve so much, but two can achieve not just double, but more, more than that. So a team can achieve a lot more than a sum of the individual parts.
Thank you for that. And as I'm listening to you, I'm remembering a conversation that actually the three of us had a few months ago. I believe it was, Yvette, when you were talking about say yes to me. And I'm thinking about the connection between putting those building blocks together through planning, through the emotional experience and the building trust, the connection between all of that and growing in emotional maturity. To get to that point, with the stronger the foundation is, this is where my mind is going. It can, where it begins to get to the point where you eventually grow your emotional maturity so that you can be objective. You know, they sometimes in psychology they use that word detachment, which I know we don't care for, but objective, gracefully objective, if you will, so that when the challenges do arise, they can navigate it more with greater health.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I like detachment.
Or
I call it an attached detachment.
there you go. There you go.
Yeah, where they're both, you're not so invested that you don't overplay or over involve yourself.
Yes.
And that's with teachers, with
Yeah.
organizations. You just keep to me it's about healthy boundaries.
Yes, very much so. Very much so. Yes, detachment works for me. There is that objectivity, and yet you're not out of touch.
Right. You
With
still
both
have empathy and connection.
yourself as well as
Yeah.
with others.
Yeah.
That's very good. We've had a dynamic conversation for the past hour. The two of you you're the best. Let me just invite Yvette Jordan one more time to join us if you'd like to continue the conversation at all. But otherwise, why don't you each of you share a summary thought about the story and perhaps a key point that is a takeaway, and then we'll talk briefly about our mission to create an ecosystem of trust conversations. Yvette, would you go first?
Which Yvette?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, yeah. Yvette Bethel.
Oh, okay.
Any
I think
concluding
with the case studies, we're seeing that every situation is so different. And some of the things are also so similar.
Yes.
But each one has to be taken, kind of separately and deconstructed so we can understand what's at play, because there's so many layers. We explored, two perspectives, but obviously there were many more perspectives, and it was more one than the other. So it's important to understand that trust has multiple layers, including self-trust, which is a feeder for the whole trust system that we create for ourselves. All right, thanks, Yvette.
Thank you, Yvette.
So, from a trust perspective, these talks are exciting because we're able to see so many different ways that we can apply the work, and how the trust work connects into so many things. Like you have a plan to do your best program where you focus on certain things, but trust ties into that.
Oh.
So anything to do with relationships at any level, there's always going to be a trust component or distrust, depending on what the situation is. So I think these conversations are valuable from that perspective. And I look forward to the next one and the next one and the next one. It makes me think. It helps me to kind of apply all the theory, because this stuff is is now is application. And I think that's a powerful skill to have.
Thank you, Yvette,
Yes.
very much. Lorraine?
Yes, I love that. It's like we're shining a light on to the trust, you know, with some of the layers and the ways in which it creates that network, that ecosystem we're going to be mentioning in a moment. And it's so empowering to look at the application of trust, where we can just shine that light compassionately, you know, for ourselves, you know, obviously for that young man and his journey with self-trust, and with Sarah, you know, the leader, her journey with her self-trust, and how they trust willingness built that trust worthiness. It built trust within the whole team that was a deeply emotional, you know, experience and satisfying. There's something deeply satisfying about human beings having their hearts open. And trust is such a key, such a, you know, central part of that. And it's all about, it's how to live fully alive.
Yeah.
It is, it's living fully alive. And when challenges come, you know, we can stand, we've got something strong to stand on, you know, in ourselves and together, you know, so that together we can overcome those challenges. It's very, very empowering and inspiring.
Thank you, Lorraine. To your point, these are challenging times. We're
Yes.
always in the midst of challenging times in one form or another, but it's especially challenging now in many different ways around the world. And you used a word earlier that is one of my favorite words, intentional. And if we go back to that quote at the very beginning by Dale Carnegie, inaction breeds doubt and fear. Doubt equals distrust. As the quote continues, action breeds confidence and courage. So it's about being that intentional to address, and there are ways of addressing both individually and as leaders and as part of a team, and each team member part of that ecosystem where everyone needs to and will benefit from being intentional, taking action. And there's the place to begin, I believe, is in planning. And through the course of planning, such good things can emerge, such as increased trust, cohesive teams, and that positive energy and motivation that even customers feel.
Mm.
Thank you both very much. Let me bring up the screen, a slide, as we talk for just a brief moment about the ecosystem of trust conversations. And let me see if this is it. Do you see Trust Conversations logo?
Yes.
Yes.
And this is what I was looking for. Thank you for your patience. Yvette, would you walk us through, and Lorraine as well, in terms of your thoughts? Because what we're really focused on, and what the last concluding thought we want to leave you all with, is that we are on a journey to create an ecosystem of trust conversations. More of these conversations out of which we learn and out of which we gain tools we can use.
Well, the vision for the trust conversations is to really create an interconnective kind of grouping of conversations. So, you know, you're in Boston, Rick. You can start having conversations like this within organizations or outside of organizations. Lorraine is in, she's based in the UK. She can, her area is not leaders in business, her areas are, you know, leaders in churches, leaders in schools. So as we build out the conversations, and Lorraine is going to be doing the next one, I think. or 2 or 3, however many. But the key is to have enough of these going so that people around the world are thinking, you know what, there's a trust component to this. Maybe we should think about it, because a lot of times engagement plans go through, plans for change go through, and there's never a trust component, there's never a people, and that whole managing the safe space component. And so by elevating the kind of the position of trust in their minds, hopefully they'll start addressing some of the people challenges, even though AI may be coming in and doing some things that people do, there will still be some form of human involvement, and so it's still needed. And now there are questions between, around trust and AI. So there's so many trust kinds of topics that we can explore. That would be quite interesting.
Thank you, Yvette. Lorraine, what are your thoughts?
Yes, I feel it's a very engaging way. Having these trust conversations it's not a spectator sport, it's it's very much we're looking to engage people, because through the medium of a story, of someone telling the story about a particular incident or over a period of time, we can find our own story in that. We can relate to that. We can say, that's me. Oh, I need to think about that. And what about this and how it relates? And we've had really engaging conversations and engagement from people as they relate what we're talking about to their own situations, personally and professionally.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so empowering as well, because these questions, or the light that's shone, it's like opens up new ground to explore. And we can build this together. We can further this and equip people, with some tools and some questions and some ways of thinking, ways of becoming more trustworthy, building that trust willingness to see the change they want to see that positive impact.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very a safe space. I think it's a very applicable, a very practical way of people engaging with this and being able to take something away that will empower them in their own situations.
Yeah.
Well said. Well said. Thank you, Lorraine Fellows, and thank you, Yvette Bethel. Couldn't have said it better myself, and I totally agree with you. So this concludes this series, two-part series of Trust Conversations, Leadership and Engagement. It's a Matter of Trust. Thank you so much for being with us, investing your time and your curiosity into this. Stay curious, and we'll look forward to seeing you again. Yvette and Lorraine, thank you both again.
Thank you too, Rick. Thanks, Rick.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.